I remember one of the first times that I was in Kiev, Ukraine. It was just right after a revolution had taken place where the people overthrew the government, which seems to happen a lot in that part of the world. But there was a group of individuals who had decided that they had had enough of the anarchy and the overwhelming oppression by the government, and they decided they were going to take matters into their own hands. And there was this revolution that took place in the square. It looked like something out of a movie scene. And in one day, 100 individuals were shot dead by the government, and this revolution was sparked throughout the entire country that eventually overthrew the country and brought democracy back to the nation. And there was signs everywhere of revolution in the square. That there were signs painted and memorials and flowers and pictures and candles. But I remember walking through the street and turning the corner, and there, spray painted on the wall in huge letters, was this phrase that said, "Freedom is my religion." Now, I read that and something inside of me was stirred. Obviously, you read that first, you think this is a little heretical, right? That freedom might be my religion. And yet, reading that sign, there was something inside of me that was connected to it. Because I realized that every single human being on the planet longs to be set free. That we all long for freedom inside of us. Now, we don't just long to be set free from rules that are imposed on us by a government or by someone else or by a workplace. We don't only long to be free from the systems of this world, from the man, from the things that we are thrust into, but we long to be set free from ourselves, from our own thoughts, our own habits, our own actions, the things that we long to stop or start and seems like we can't, that we're found in bondage. See, the crazy thing is that we can come into a room like this, all from different places and backgrounds and having different schedules and belief systems about the world. And here's one thing that I do know is that every single person in this room, including myself, has something that we long to be free from. That it could be something physical, like I have pain. It could be something mental or emotional. It could be a relational dynamic. It could be something spiritual that's going on for you. But every single one of us could identify at least one space in our lives where we say, I need freedom from this. I actually think it's what draws people to Jesus. See, most people don't just wake up one day and just say, I need Jesus. It's usually when we start paying attention to the deeper longings inside of all of us. It's when we start paying attention to the part of us that longs for freedom, that longs for connection, that longs for intimacy, that longs for a future, that longs for meaning, that draws us into the deeper questions that connect us to Him. See, the human spirit longs to be set free. And I think this is actually one of the most compelling arguments for God. What are the chances that every single one of us have a longing for freedom? And we realize that it's so difficult to be met, that we struggle trying to find this elusive thing called freedom, that we are all searching for it. And Paul actually tells us explicitly one of the reasons why Jesus came for us and why he would even decide to set us free. Because most of Jesus' conversation was about freedom. He who the Son sets free will be free indeed, and all these other conversations. But in Paul, in Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 1, he says this, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery." See, Paul explicitly tells us why Jesus has come to set us free. You know why he's come to set you free? So that you could be free. That's his agenda. And not just so that you could be free, but that you could stay free. That you would no longer have to go back to this slavery that so many of us are familiar with. That he didn't set us free to manipulate us. He didn't set us free to control us in some way, shape, or form. He didn't set us free so we could hold it over our heads and say, now that I've set you free, you must do this for me. He just set us free so that we as individuals could have the longing in our soul satisfied, and that this might actually connect us in this beautiful synergistic relationship with him, where he sets us free and we respond freely out of our own hearts and our own longing. Now, here's the thing, is that most of us, when we hear, hey, God's set us free, and he's set us free for freedom's sake, I don't know about you, but there's something inside of me that's slightly skeptical, right? Have you ever received a gift that seems a little too good? Or someone's treating you a little too nice, and you're thinking, what is the catch? What's the flip side over here? Last Friday, I was driving my car. I was out in Anaheim running some errands, and as I was pulling into the parking lot, the engine dies. Just dies. And so I did the whole, oh my gosh, Lord, please, if you're alive, please help my car, and I will do whatever you want if you turn my car over, So luckily it turns back on, and I drive it to my mechanic, and they said, you got to take it to the dealership, and the dealership gets the car, and they say, it's the engine. The engine's blown. Now I have a 100,000-mile warranty, and my car is 104,000 miles. And I thought, wouldn't this be it, right? And I thought, all right, Lord, if this is the sermon illustration that you would like to give me, I will gladly take it. However, I get a phone call from the mechanic saying, hey, he leaves a message. He says, hey, good news. Couldn't really hear it. Come pick up your car. So I call him back, and he says, hey, we want to let you know that we talked to the dealer and we talked to the manufacturer, and they have decided to replace your engine at no cost to you, which is awesome. Now, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, but how much is this gonna cost me, right? I'm literally asking him, so how much will this cost me? No, sir, we're gonna cover it under warranty. Yeah, but like when it's done, what's the surprise bill, And he's saying, sir, it's covered. And then he said, and we'll give you a loaner car. And I'm like, there it is. How much is the loaner car, right? The engine's free, the loaner car's $6,000, right? I said, no, sir, I don't think you understand. Everything's covered under warranty. You're gonna get the loaner car for free. We're gonna replace your engine for free. You're gonna get it all back. And it took me about 5 minutes to finally go, okay, I'm good with this. We're settled, right? Because there's part of us that when we get a gift that's too good, we struggle with the reality that this could actually be happening to us, right? We struggle with this idea that that Jesus himself would set us free for the sake of being free. See, because for so many of us, we see the world through this transactional lens because it's the world in which we're swimming in. And so we find ourselves thinking, well, if I do this, then I can earn what I want or need. And then I will receive it over here. And now there's a clear exchange. So I've done something for you, you give something to me, or you give something to me, and then I will repay you in some way, shape, or form. And this is usually how we interact with the world. And so we think to ourselves, well, no one surely would come and die for me, let alone God himself, with no expectation of something on my side, with no yes and on the other side with that. I don't know about you, but the other part of this is that if this is a free gift, if Christ has come to set me free so that I could be free, guess what? Now my freedom is out of my control. And I don't like that. I don't like the idea that I don't get to work myself into freedom, or I can perform my way into freedom, or I can control or manipulate in some way. I don't want to rely on some outside source for my freedom. I'd rather just do it myself. And so what oftentimes happens is that rather than just going, okay, it's a free gift that I get to receive and that it's out of my control, we find ourselves going back to religious practices in an attempt to have freedom. And this looks all kinds of ways, and it changes for all types of generations. I mean, there's the clear, religious practices that we're familiar with, that we think, if I pray enough, if I read my Bible enough, if I go to enough meetings, if I do enough things, then somehow I will be able to have freedom. And not that those are bad things or that they're not going to be helpful in maintaining your freedom, but those don't equal freedom. And see, the crazy thing is you don't even have to be religious to fall into this pattern over and over again, because there's also cultural practices that we find ourselves in, even if you're irreligious, that we find ourselves engaging in, thinking that they'll maintain our freedom. So if I work really, really hard and I'm successful and I get the money and the position, then I'll find freedom. If I fight climate change, then I will find myself maintaining my freedom. If I dismantle the patriarchy, then I'll find myself free. And so there's all kinds of cultural conversations that we find ourselves in, that if I do this, then I will be set free. It's all religious, however you look at it. It's all the actions saying, if I do this, then I could have this, and then I'll be released into my freedom. And we assume that they'll set us free, and we still get to be in control of all of them. And Paul is dealing with this with the Galatians as he's talking here. He realizes that there was this symbol from the time of Moses that marked the people of Israel in this practice of circumcision. Now, whenever a pastor talks about circumcision, they never explain it, and it's super awkward and weird when they talk about it as if no one's like, this is a weird conversation, right? But there was this sign that was performed on the men of Israel, and they were circumcised, and it let people know they were consecrated, set aside. I don't know how they displayed this sign, but that's something, right? I don't know if they're like, you in? Yes, I'm in, right? But that's a whole other thing. But they find themselves circumcised, and now they're in the club, essentially. And so now that Jesus has come, Paul is trying to tell them, no, you're set free. And so he has this conversation about why they're wanting to return to this practice. And it says this in Galatians 5, right after this, verse 2. It says, mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. In other words, Paul's saying, you are missing the point. It's not about all the religious rituals. It's not about all the practices. He said, you can do them, great. You can do them with the wrong intentions, and they're actually going to be really, really bad for your spirit. They're going to hurt you in the long run. In and of themselves, they have very little value. And so he continues with this, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. He's saying, stop going back to assuming that you can work your way into your freedom. Stop assuming that you can perform your way into freedom, even with religious rituals, because you are set free because of the cross and nothing else. And this is the good news that Paul has brought us, that Jesus has come for, that we celebrate today, that freedom is here and now and available, and we get to rest in that through Jesus. See, there are some of you here in this room who are exhausted trying to perform your way through freedom. You may be exhausted trying to figure out, how do I set myself free? And maybe you've tried all kinds of rituals and practices. Maybe you've been coming to church for decades and you're still like, where's the freedom that I'm longing for, that is promised to me here? And what Paul invites us into is, hey, would you just lay down your striving for a moment and ease into the freedom that has been available to you from the beginning? But I think we have this misunderstanding about freedom, because when we talk about freedom, many of us are like the one side resisting it, but then others of us are like, I'm free. I can do whatever I want, right? And we equate freedom with the ability to do whatever I want. In fact, we take that verse and we're like, I'm just expressing myself in love. I don't know what your problem is over there, right? I do what I want. I drink what I want. I eat what I want. I talk how I want. I engage how I want. I do what I want. And this is where we find ourselves. And let me just tell you, equating freedom with doing whatever you want will be the fastest way to find yourself in bondage again. You can talk to anyone who is in recovery, and they will tell you that they spent all kinds of months and years doing whatever they wanted, and it did not equate to freedom. It equated to more bondage. It equated to more being stuck. It equated to more chains on them. See, Jesus sets us free, and he's like, it's free. I have come so that you may be free. And then he says, now I want you to partner with me in maintaining this freedom. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but maintaining freedom actually takes a lot of intention. It actually takes a lot of forethought. It actually takes us examining our lives and engaging in spiritual practices, not because the spiritual practices will set us free, but because it connects us to the God who has set us free, who continually allows us to step into this new space. Notice this language that Paul uses around freedom. He says, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. And he says, stand firm now to make sure that you don't get back into this space of slavery. See, this is not like just hang out and enjoy your freedom, right? This is stand firm. This is like a football stance, right? Like, you better prepare yourself to maintain your freedom, or else you're going to find yourself back in a space of bondage and slavery. See, so many of us, we get free and we're like, great, that was good. Thank you so much. Back to doing what I was doing. And Jesus says, no, I've set you free, but now you get to stand firm to assure that you do not get stuck back into this pattern. And Paul tells us how to maintain our freedom right after this. In the same chapter, Galatians chapter 5, verses 13, he says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Notice Paul is very clear on his message. You are called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. See, what you use your freedom for will determine whether you keep it or not. What you use your freedom to create in this world will determine whether or not you stay free. See, you can certainly use it to indulge your flesh, as Paul talks about here, which is all of our internal longings that call us to do what I want. In fact, it's been the same script from the very beginning. You can see it in Genesis with Adam and Eve, that it's the same internal longings that we struggle with here today. If it looks good, get it. Have you ever thought to yourself that? Have you ever been driving down the street and you're like, I know I shouldn't be eating that, but it looks good, let's get it, right? Or there's something that you're like, I clearly don't have the money for that, but I have enough credit, it looks good, get it, right? And so we find ourselves there. Or how about this? If it feels good, do it. If it feels good, this clearly is what God wants for me, and so I ought to do it. Or the coverall, it's my life, I do what I want. No one else is gonna tell me how to live my life. I'm the one in charge. I'm the one who calls the shots. No one will hold me back from living my best life now. And so we find ourselves engaging in these same conversations. Here's the problem, is that they feel good in the moment. It feels awesome to blow a bunch of money. It feels awesome to talk to someone and speak down to them in a way that belittles them when you're frustrated or angry. It feels awesome to eat what you need to, or it feels awesome to indulge in the private judgment or cynicism or contempt. It feels amazing in the moment, but the problem is that we eventually find ourselves back enslaved in the middle of it. So you can either use your freedom to indulge your flesh, or as Paul calls us, you can use your freedom to humbly serve one another in love. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that, I intuitively don't connect serving one another in love to freedom. I actually don't think, I'm like, how do those two connect together? I mean, in my head, I'm like, I'm free. I should be able to figure out my schedule and use my energy how I want, and to be able to do what I want with my time and my money. And so how does being free and being set free connect to serving one another's humbly in love? It seems like it's a step backwards, you know? This is the equivalent of saying, oh good, I have a free day in my schedule that I can do whatever I want. You know what I'm gonna do? Laundry, you know? We've all had those days. It doesn't feel very free, right? And yet here we find ourselves in there. But here's the crazy thing. It actually goes even deeper than what Paul tells us about serving one another in love. In fact, here's the thing. We talk a lot about living a great life here at Humanity Church, and I actually think every human being on this planet was made for greatness. I think that every single human being was put on this planet to live a great story. That you were made to impact history in some way, shape, or form. The problem is in our culture, we equate greatness with what we do. That if I do the podcast, or if I write a book, or if I start a business, or if I create the thing, then I will be great. But what the scriptures actually talk about is the greatness that we are called into, that every single one of us has inside of us that's longing to be pulled out, actually has nothing to do with what we do. It has to do with who we are at our core. That the greatness is something that happens inside of us, not externally. And so this is what Jesus tells us about greatness and how it is defined in Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 26. It says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant. Bummer, right? It gets so worse, right? And whoever wants to be first must be your slave, right? It goes beyond service. You're like, now you're a slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, if you want to step into the greatness that your life was called to step into, if you want to live the story of greatness that you know you were called to tell, Jesus actually tells us that what's required is us becoming a servant. And if you want to be first, you must actually become a slave. I thought we were avoiding this, right? Now we're having a conversation around slavery and service as the pathway to maintaining freedom over here. How does this make sense at all? Because remember, how you use your freedom will determine whether you keep it or not. See, when I use my freedom to indulge my flesh, when I use my freedom to say, hey, it looks good, get it, it feels good, do it, I do what I want, no one's gonna tell me what to do, I'm in charge of my life, and I am the only one who is going to impose any type of regulations on my life, I actually begin to start seeing people as tools to use to fulfill my own needs and desires. So it actually shifts my perspective on how I see the world when I choose to use my freedom for myself. Now I start looking at people saying, what can I get from them to make me feel good? How can I use them to have what I want in life? And what do I need to do to manipulate all of these people out there so I actually get what I want in life? This is how people end up getting used for money and for sex and for influence and for personal gain, and it leads to a diminishing of their freedom and my freedom as well. And then I start looking at people and myself as just a cog in the system that needs to be used to get to a destination. Like Brandon said earlier, we had the privilege of going to the Sheer Love Free Reign International Gala last Wednesday and got to hear so many incredible stories from survivors and for those who are on the field and for those who are helping men and women come out of the sex trafficking industry. And our church has over the years given tens of thousands of dollars and sent dozens of team members over there to support them in various ways. And so we are a key partner in what's taking place over there. But one of the stats they said was that today, 50 million people are enslaved in the world, either for sex or labor, that they are being forced to give and do something for another person against their own will. Now, it's easy to look at that and say, those horrible, evil people that would enslave other people, and it is pure evil, don't get me wrong. It's one of the reasons why we as a community feel it's a cause to fight against, because it diminishes the image of God in these men and women. But don't get it twisted. The same attitude that causes people to sell another person for sex or for labor is the same attitude that causes us to use people for our own desires, just on a different scale. And it shows up in all kinds of different ways. It shows up in the contempt that we have when people don't do what we want them to do. When we look at our kids or we look at our friends and we go, they're so stupid for doing that. It's in the silent judgment of other people that we keep to ourselves. It's in the sarcasm and it's in the cynicism of others who are actually going out and giving of themselves and serving and pouring themselves out into the world. It's in the being short with people around you because you just don't have the energy to engage in the conversations that are needed. It's deciding to not manage our resources and our finances in a way that we don't get to give back in some way, shape, or form. It's about finding small ways to punish people for the things that they do or don't do at home, at work, at school. It's about saying, you know, I don't actually have time to give myself. I'm too busy. My life is too crazy. I'm too important. This is beneath me. And so now people become pawns in our own plans. And we may use people, or we may do something even more inhumane. We may just disregard them and not notice that there are other people out there with needs and pains and concerns and hurts all around us. And here's the thing, when we start finding ourselves in this space, when we go down this path, there will never be enough to satisfy the flesh. There will never be enough people to use. There will never be enough people to take advantage of. There will never be enough energy to maintain all of this. So now it finds itself, and we find ourselves in this vicious cycle where not only do we diminish other people's freedom by using them for what they can give to us, but now we start to see the world through a very scarce lens. So we look out and they say, there's not enough, so I need to take more advantage of people. And I need to take more, and I don't have enough, so I need to keep pulling in the little that I have. And so now we find ourselves in bondage again to the scarcity of there not being enough. And so now I start using people. And freedom starts to implode for everyone. But see, on the other hand, service is birthed and maintains a whole different perspective on the world. See, because service actually requires that we live in a framework of more than enough. It actually requires us to put on the lenses and see the world through the frame that not only do I have more than enough, but I have more than enough to give away. That I actually have everything needed to serve the world around me. See, because I love that it doesn't just say serve, but it actually tells us the type of service needed to transform the world and to maintain our freedom. It says to serve one another humbly in love. See, humility, I think, is one of the most underrated characteristics of a human being. And it is a characteristic that is so misunderstood, because I think that when we hear live humbly or to serve humbly, it means to make ourselves low. Like just grovel and do all of like the thankless things in life and just find yourself crawling on the ground because you're so low and so disconnected. But we've talked about this before, but humility is not making yourself low. What humility is seeing yourself accurately. It's having like an accurate picture of who you are and having an accurate perspective of who lives over here and what's taking place inside of me. It's about seeing all of my flaws and all of my weaknesses and saying, yes, those live in there, but it's also being willing to own all of my strengths and all of the beauty and all of the glory that Christ has placed inside of me and saying, I'm willing to see all of it. See, when I think about humility, I think about you know when you go to like the store and you try something on, or guys, when you go to like the suit shop and there's like 3 mirrors, right, on either side? My grandparents have have a shower, folks, with mirrors on all sides. It's a torture chamber. But it's essentially being willing to look in the mirror just naked and go, all right, let's take a look. Here's all the places that are working, and here's all the places that aren't working, and I'm willing to just see it accurately and say, God, would you transform all of the places that are not working? And I'm gonna offer up all of the places that you have transformed, that are working, that you have created beauty inside of you, and I'm gonna use all of these. See, when you see yourself accurately, when you're like, all right, I got a snapshot, I'm willing to see who's there over in the mirror, we're able to then give of ourselves. See, because if you actually don't know what you have to give, there's nothing to give. And so when we have an inaccurate view of ourselves, it impedes us from longing to serve. And usually we fall into one of 2 traps. We either find ourselves like, I'm above this. I've arrived and I do not need to serve anymore. I'm above this. Or we find ourselves saying, I actually don't have anything to offer. I'm just, a simple person who has nothing to give, and so I might as well not even serve. And let me just tell you, both of those are self-focused, and both of those are the fruit of arrogance, because they both say, I know better than the Creator. I actually have a more accurate view of myself than God himself. And so I will be the determiner of value. I will be the determiner of worth over here, rather than looking to the God who has come for me and saying, God, would you allow me to see myself clearly? See, one of the things that happens when you connect to Jesus is that your perspective shifts, that you start to see not only yourself, but you start to see the world through new lenses. See, you start to recognize, oh my gosh, I was dead and I was broken on the inside. And that I was incapable of actually stepping into the goodness that's available to me, and that you recognize that you have been completely set free by the cross. That you have been completely released from the grip of that brokenness and the grip of that hopelessness, and based on nothing that you did or will do or can do or any other religious practice, it is just yours. And you recognize that because of that, you are now elevated to places and influences that you did not deserve, but that are yours because of who he is. And that you recognize in that you now have all the resources that you need, and not all the resources that you need, but all the resources that God has placed inside of you to give away to serve the world around you. See, it shifts how you see the world. See, someone in that position has influence to give back. Someone who sees themselves in that position recognize, oh, I've been given so much, and that I have been the recipient of so much that God has poured out to me, that the natural response is to serve. Several years ago, a couple came into our community, Tony Joe and Ashley. And they would tell you this, they were a mess. I mean, they were just a mess in so many different ways. They weren't married, they had 2 kids, but their relationship was falling apart, that they were struggling with being together. Tony Joe will be the first one to tell you that he struggled with anger and addiction, and that they were in constant breakdown. Financial breakdown, relational breakdown, breakdown with their kids. And I can't tell you how many moments there were phone calls of, I'm done and we're over and I don't think we can do this, or man, things fell apart last night and they got really bad and I don't know how to repair this. And there were countless hours, not just from Marla and myself, but dozens other in the community that stood alongside of them and supported them and served them and poured out into their life and gave back to them in some way, shape, or form. And over the years, their lives as they were being served became stronger and more beautiful as they connected to Jesus, as the community around them were serving them, pouring into their lives. And I remember when Tony Joe came to me and said, hey, I think it's time to get married, and would you marry Ashley and I, just like on a Sunday right after church, and they got married. And then he adopted Noah, Ashley's biological son, who Tony has always been the father there for him, and legally adopted him, and now Noah's serving on our setup team and teardown team and in youth, and Ashley is now a part of our connection team, and Tony Joe is an integral part of our setup and teardown team, and they're very connected to our humanity groups, and in fact, Tony Joe has been integral in making sure we've gotten things moved over the last few weeks to the new space over there, and they are just thriving. And when you look at their lives from where they were 5 years ago to where they are today, they're like completely different people. You can't even see them anymore. The old version's gone. And I'll never forget, a few weeks ago, Tony Joe came up to me at our humanity group right beforehand, and he said, hey, a few weeks ago, one of Anna Linda's, their daughter's friend's parents passed away in a car accident. It was very tragic. It was all over the news here in Pomona. And they said, we were like on scene very quickly, wanting to comfort the family. And Tony said, my first thought was, I need to call Pastor Nathan so that he can come pray for them and minister to them in this time of struggle. And Tony Joe said, you know what, I stopped, and he said, you know what? We have been poured into, and we've been prayed over, and we have been healed and restored and delivered and served in such a way that we are now in a place to serve the world. And which was awesome. And Tony and Ashley said, we don't need to call Pastor Nathan. Let's go pray for them. Let's go serve them. Let's go over there and be for them who others have been for us. And see, this is the beautiful thing, that as Tony and Ashley were set free by Jesus through people who were serving them, the natural response inside of them is to go serve. The natural response inside of them is to recognize, oh, we have everything that we need now to go and give back. And had you asked me 5 years ago, would Tony Joe and Ashley be ministering to people who have just lost family members, I would have probably laughed in your face, but that's what God does. that as we are being served, the natural inclination is to serve other people. When you recognize that you have been served by God through people, it changes how you see yourself and the world around you. I am no longer here to consume, and to be just served. I am here in the greatness that God has poured out in me to give back to the world around me. And this is how freedom is maintained. And it's beautiful. See, we live in a culture that begs us to see ourselves as victims. The victims of our circumstances, the victims of our stories from our past, the victims of our family, the victims of our culture, of our finances, of our own selves. And it begs us to believe the lie that we can't give, because if we give, we'll be left without. And so we start looking at the world through this lens of a zero-sum game, that there's only so much. So if I give, if I serve someone, then I will be left without. So we find ourselves saying things similar to what we talked about last week in terms of building one another up, when we say, well, I'm not gonna serve until someone serves me because I need service. Or we find ourselves saying, like, I'm just gonna get mine, or I'm owed something first before I'm able to serve other people. So, but you know what service is? Service is a declaration to the world, no, I have been set free. And no one decides for me how I give myself. No one will take that freedom away from me. It is a declaration saying, I have all the resources available because of the work of the cross. And I choose to give that away to the world around us. And it chooses abundance in a culture that calls us into scarcity. And as a free person, you can do whatever you want. It is for freedom that you have been set free. But what you choose to do with your freedom will determine whether you keep it or not. And service is the pathway that says, I will partner with God in expanding freedom in the world, not only for myself, but for other people as I serve. And I love that Paul tells us, he says, Jesus went first. See, again, this is not just like do good and be altruistic in the world. There's plenty of messages around that, but this is because Jesus came as a servant and gave himself as a ransom for many. See, Jesus came as a servant, and he didn't look at service like a have to, like, oh gosh, here I go again with these crazy people who are just gonna crucify me in the end. He doesn't look at it like that. He just keeps giving of himself. And guess what? As he gave himself, even to people who betrayed him at the end, it did not diminish his power. It did not diminish his greatness. In fact, as he gave, it actually elevated his power. It elevated his greatness. It elevated who he is and the authority he had. It did not deplete him. His service to humanity rippled into the future, and we are recipients of that service. This is what we get to do when we choose freedom. See, how do you repay a God who serves you? You choose to serve. And you say, I choose to maintain the freedom that has been given to me. See, if you want to rage against the system that is constantly telling you that you will never be enough, or that you will never have enough, or that you will never do enough, or that you will never amount up to anything, or that because of X, Y, Z, you are not as great as you should be, look at it in the face and say, no, I've been set free. And no one gets to take that freedom from me. No one gets to determine the limits of my freedom. That I have been served by Christ, and because of that, I have everything I need. I have everything I need to give back. See, if everyone lived like this, the world would instantly be transformed. See, I think it's so interesting that we live in a time where humanity seems to be looking for a revolution. It seems like every month there's like a new revolution that we're trying to engage in. How do we overturn the system? How do we make humanity right again? And there seems to be themes in our longing for a revolution in this season. That we long for something that will change everything for good. Something that will bring justice, something that will create equality, something that will elevate humanity, something that will restore dignity. It's as if our souls right now are longing for a revolution of service. And that can only be started if there is a God who endlessly pours out the resources needed to serve the world with him and through him, to maintain our freedom and to set the world free through the power of the cross. So I want you just to take a moment like we did last week. And I'd like for you, would you just close your eyes for a moment? And I'd actually invite you into a perspective shift right now. Would you just take a moment, and even if you're not a follower of Jesus, I believe he'll speak to you in this moment. Would you just ask Jesus to show you all the ways that he has served you? Just think about the fact that you live in a house or an apartment, that you have a place to go to after this, that you're more than likely not going to be hungry, that you're sitting here in a community that loves you, even if you're here for the first time, that you have resources around you to move your life forward. Just think about the amount that God has poured into your life. And would you allow that abundance and that gratitude for a moment just to well up? In a world that is constantly telling you that you don't have enough or you need more or that it's not sufficient, would you just allow yourself to recognize how much the God of the universe has served you? And now with that realization, would you just ask God right now in this moment, who is one person that I can give this away to, that I can serve this week from this realization of gratitude and abundance? I don't know what that looks like. It may be an act of service. It might just be simply saying, hey, I need to call that person up and we need to get coffee this week. I just need to check in on them. It could be someone that you've given up on. It could be literally like someone who's moving or someone who needs help or someone who's struggling financially and you're like, I could help. Would you just allow God to impress just one person on your heart right now? That you could take all that abundance and all that generosity and all that gratitude and say, I will serve. And recognize that it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. So don't use all that freedom that he's given you to indulge your flesh. Use it to serve one another humbly in love. And let's together start a revolution of service because of the God who has served us. And this morning, if you're here and you've not yet connected to Jesus, or maybe you haven't connected to him in a while, maybe you're like, man, I recognize today how much I've been given. God just wants to connect to you in a relationship. And this is a moment for you. And so if you are not yet connected to Jesus as your Lord, this is your moment to do that. And if today you're like, man, I haven't connected to Jesus, or I've been disconnected from a while, with no eyes looking around, would you just raise your hand and say, I want to connect to Jesus today. I want to know him. Awesome. If you're online, you can just type Jesus in the chat. And I just want you to pray this really simple prayer. Dear Jesus, I give you my life. I give you my life. I just want to pray for you if you prayed that prayer. Jesus, I ask right now that you would make yourself very real to those who have just connected with you. That it's not a magic words, it's a recognition of the fullness of who you are and the work of the cross. I thank you that you are the God who has served us. Would you now empower us to go serve the world with everything inside of us? We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.